Get up. This seat was never meant for someone like you. 17-year-old Zara Coleman heard the words before she understood them, the way you hear a car horn before you register the danger. The cabin lights of Wyndham Air, Flight 32391, buzzed faintly overhead, the recycled air already thick with the smell of pretzels and someone's cologne. Every head in row 22 turned toward her. Her boarding pass was folded neatly in the seatback pocket. Her window seat, Tepsi 2A, was correctly assigned. Her backpack sat exactly where it should, tucked beneath the seat in front of her, zipper facing out the way her father always told her to keep it. None of that mattered. A woman with silver hair pinned into a flawless twist had decided, in the space of 40 seconds, that Zara did not belong there, and the decision had already begun to spread through the cabin like smoke under a door. In exactly 19 minutes, a $72 million Bombardier Global 8000 would taxi directly across the active runway at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, and Wyndham Air would spend the next 3 years learning exactly what that cost them. Zara pressed her spine against the window and made herself as small as she could without disappearing. She had done this before. Not this exact scene, but versions of it, in stores, in lobbies, in the front office of her own high school, where a substitute teacher once asked to see her hall pass twice in the same hour. She knew the choreography. Speak too firmly, and you become the problem. Say nothing, and the problem never ends. Her hands did not shake. That was the part she was proud of later, when she had time to be proud of anything. Her hands stayed perfectly still in her lap, curled loosely, the way her father had taught her to hold them when the world decided to test her. Before we go further into what happened on that runway, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe dignity shouldn't depend on who's looking at you, stay with me, because this story is about to get a lot harder to watch before it gets any easier. What you're about to hear happened over the course of one ordinary Tuesday morning. And by the end of it, an airline that had operated for 28 years without a single federal inquiry would find itself the subject of 3. 3 hours earlier, the terminal at Charlotte Douglas had smelled like coffee and jet fuel. That particular mix that means somewhere, someone's life is about to change. Zara had arrived at 4:47 in the morning for a 7:55 flight, not because she needed that much time, but because her father had drilled a single sentence into her since she was 7 years old. Being early is being on time. Being on time is being late. She wore a gray MIT Aerophathon hoodie, the fabric soft from 100 washes, and dark jeans, and sneakers that had walked her to and from the robotics lab at Providence Prep more times than she could count. Her natural curls were pulled back into a low bun. Nothing about her outfit announced anything. That was deliberate. She had learned, the way children of a certain kind of family learn things early, that blending in was its own quiet survival safeguard, and that the only thing she wanted to stand out for was the number 34 written in red ink at the top of her Aerothon acceptance letter. Her ranking out of 11,000 applicants, out of every 17-year-old in the country who had submitted a propulsion design for MIT's summer aerospace program. She had cried when that letter came, not from surprise, but from relief. The specific kind of relief that comes when the thing you worked for finally agrees to exist. For 3 years, she had spent Saturday mornings at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library building flight simulations on a borrowed laptop while her friends slept in. She had entered 4 propulsion competitions and lost 2 of them to seniors twice her experience. She kept every rejection email in a folder titled Fuel, because her father told her that failure, stored properly, burns clean. Around her neck, hidden beneath the collar of her hoodie, hung a small brass compass on a leather cord, its glass scratched from years of being touched. It had belonged to her mother, Eleanor Coleman, a labor and delivery nurse, who died of an aggressive cancer when Zara was 11. Before that, Eleanor had once been turned away from a hotel front desk in Savannah, with a full reservation confirmation in her hand, told there had been a mistake, that the room had just been given to someone else. She had told that story to Zara only once, calmly, over dinner, the way you tell a child something true and painful, because you'd rather they hear it from you than learn it alone. Find your way back to yourself. Eleanor had written on the small card tied to the compass the Christmas before she died. Zara touched it now, under her hoodie, the way she always did before something that mattered. At 6:52 that morning, she had called her father from a window seat near gate C14. His face filling her phone screen, the Charlotte skyline behind him through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office on the 11th floor of Coleman Dynamics Group. "There's my engineer," he'd said, his voice booming even through a phone speaker. "Go show those MIT professors what a Coleman can build." She'd laughed, the sound cutting cleanly through the terminal noise. "Dad, I just don't want to get lost on campus the first day." Details he'd waved off. "You've earned every square foot of that campus." Then his tone had shifted, the way it always did at the end of these calls, dropping half an octave into the register she thought of as his real voice. "Be aware of your surroundings, Ladybug. Not everyone in this world sees you the way I do." She had said okay, the way she always did, and they both understood it was not really a goodbye about a flight. It was the 400th version of a conversation no father should have to have, delivered so many times it had become almost tender. "I love you more than escape velocity," she'd told him. Their private joke, nerdy and entirely theirs, and then she had boarded. Marcus Coleman was not a man who filled a room by accident. At 6'3", with the disciplined posture of 11 years as a Marine Corps intelligence officer, still visible in the way he stood, he commanded silence in a meeting the moment he stopped talking. He had built Coleman Dynamics Group out of a 2-bedroom apartment in West Charlotte and a laptop he'd bought, used for $420, after 26 venture capital firms turned him down for a logistically routing algorithm that a white classmate from his own MBA program had pitched 18 months later, almost word for word, and received $9 million to build. Marcus had bootstrapped instead, working nights as a private security consultant while he coded in the mornings before his daughter woke up. His first real contract came from a mid-sized textile distributor in Gastonia, and he executed it so cleanly that 3 more contracts followed within the year. By year 11, Coleman Dynamics Group managed freight logistics for 6 Fortune 500 companies across 3 continents, and Marcus Coleman, at 46 years old, was worth $2.4 billion, though you would never have guessed it from the 10-year-old Seiko watch on his wrist. Nothing in his professional life meant more to him than the 17-year-old, currently 31,000 feet, from becoming an engineer at MIT. He had made her exactly one promise the day she was born, whispered so quietly, the nurse in the room hadn't heard it. "Your road will be easier than mine." Not without obstacles, he knew better than to promise that, but she would never face one of them completely alone. Now write that promise down, because it matters exactly 40 minutes. Patricia Whitfield had boarded in Group 2 20 minutes before Zara, and had spent that time transforming the empty middle seat of row 22 into a small, deliberate fortress. A folded silk scarf, a bottle of imported water, a leather day planner with her initials embossed in gold. The latest issue of a regional business quarterly opened to a page featuring her own face beneath the headline "Charlotte's Wireless Power Players." At 61, Patricia ran a boutique commercial property firm that managed 4 office towers along South Tryon Street, and she had built her identity, brick by brick, around the idea that she could tell, instantly and without effort, exactly who belonged in a room and who had wandered into it by mistake. She did not think of herself as cruel. She thought of herself as observant. That distinction would matter to her for the rest of her life, though not in the way she expected. She had grown up in a house 11 miles from where she now sat, the only daughter of a man who ran a small chain of dry cleaners, and taught her, without ever saying it directly, that respectability was a fence you built around yourself, one small judgment at a time. She had spent 31 years learning which restaurants sat you by the window and which sat you near the kitchen, which country clubs required a sponsor and which required two. And she had come to believe, quietly and completely, that this fluency was itself a kind of virtue. Patricia did not consider herself the kind of woman who caused harm. She considered herself the kind of woman who maintained order, who noticed when a room had drifted out of alignment and, gently, firmly, set it right again. It had never once occurred to her that a 17-year-old with a backpack and a physics podcast might be the room functioning exactly as it should, and that she herself was the variable that didn't belong. When Zara arrived at row 22 with her boarding pass in hand, Patricia did not move. She looked up slowly, her eyes traveling from Zara's sneakers to her hoodie to her hair, and something in her face closed like a door. "That's my space," she said, though Zara had said nothing yet, only gestured toward the window. "Excuse me, I'm in 22A, Zara said, her voice even. Patricia exhaled through her nose, gathered her Louis Vuitton tote from the middle seat with theatrical reluctance, and rose only half out of her seat, forcing Zara to twist sideways and press past her, their shoulders brushing. "Of course," Patricia muttered, "to no one, to everyone." Zara settled into her window seat, buckled her belt, and turned her face toward the glass, watching a ground crew load luggage onto a conveyor belt, determined not to let one small collision spoil. A morning she had waited 3 years for. She had no way of knowing that Patricia Whitfield was not finished. Patricia Whitfield was only beginning. The first escalation came 4 minutes later, quiet and almost bureaucratic, which made it worse. Patricia's eyes fell to the corner of Zara's backpack, a single centimeter of gray canvas crossing an invisible boundary beneath the middle seat. "Excuse me," Patricia said, loud enough now for row 21 to hear over their headphones. "Your bag is touching my foot." Zara looked down, apologized, and pulled the bag 6 inches closer to her own seat, tucking it flush against the support strut. "Is that better?" Patricia let out a long breath through pursed lips, as though she had been personally wronged. "I'd appreciate it if you kept your things in your designated area. Some of us expect a certain standard back here." They were both sitting in standard economy. There was no premium tier in row 22, and Patricia knew it. Zara knew it too, and felt a flush of heat rise up the back of her neck, and swallowed it, because her father's voice was already in her head. "Don't give anyone a reason." She put her earbuds in and hoped that would be the end of it. It was not the end of it. It was the opening move. At 7:38, 17 minutes before the scheduled departure, a flight attendant named Renee Sawyer made her final walkthrough of the cabin, checking seatbelts and tray tables, her face already carrying the particular fatigue of someone on her 3rd flight before 9 in the morning. Patricia flagged her down with 2 fingers raised, the gesture of a woman accustomed to summoning waitstaff. "I just want to be sure this young woman has the correct seat assignment," Patricia said, her voice dropping into a register of manufactured concern, loud enough that 4 rows could hear it. "She seems a little unsure of where she belongs." Zara pulled one earbud free, her stomach dropping through the floor of the cabin, and understood with total clarity that the seeds of something ugly had already been planted, and that the next 12 minutes were going to decide how far it would grow. Patricia's opening question about the backpack had only been reconnaissance. Finding no resistance, she escalated with practiced precision. A strategist testing terrain before committing troops. "I really think you should verify her identification," she told Renee, her voice pitched to carry. These seats get booked fraudulently more than people realize. The ticket could belong to someone else entirely. Heat rose in Zara's face, a mixture of humiliation and something colder underneath it. Across the aisle, a man in a wrinkled suit lowered his newspaper for the first time since boarding, his expression uneasy but still passive. 2 rows back, a woman in a Carolina blue cardigan half rose from her seat, clearly deciding whether to intervene. "I have ID," Zara said, and reached for her wallet, the motion itself feeling like a small surrender to a demand that should never have been made. She handed her license to Renee. "My name is Zara Coleman. The ticket is in my name." Renee compared the 2 documents, nodded once, and said, "Everything matches. She's in her assigned seat." And for one breath, Zara believed it might actually be over. Patricia was not finished. Her strategy pivoted seamlessly, from questioning the ticket to inventing a new story entirely. "She's been acting strange since she sat down," Patricia announced to Renee and to the surrounding rows, playing loud music, moving erratically. And she lowered her voice into something meant to sound reluctant. "There's an odor." Each word was chosen with surgical intent. In a post-911 cabin, unusual behavior is a phrase with weight, and Patricia knew exactly how much weight it carried. "That's completely false," Zara said, her composure finally cracking at the edges. "I've had one earbud in listening to a physics podcast, and I haven't moved from this seat." From the row behind them, a college student with a MacBook sticker on her tray table spoke up, unprompted. "I've been filming since the ID check," she said, holding up her phone, "and the only person acting strange in this row is the woman making things up." A murmur passed through nearby seats. Patricia's jaw tightened for exactly 1 second before she recovered, pivoting again with the fluid confidence of someone who had never once, in 61 years, been told no and made it stick. She reached for one more angle, the way a person reaches for a second weapon when the first one fails to land. "She's also been going through my things," Patricia added, gesturing vaguely toward the seat pocket between them. "I set my planner down for one moment, and when I looked again, the pages had been moved. It was a lie built from nothing. The planner had not shifted an inch, and 3 passengers within arm's reach could see that clearly. But it did what it was designed to do, which was to plant one more small seed of suspicion in a cabin already primed to believe the worst about the one passenger who had done nothing at all. "I never touched her bag," Zara said, and for the first time, her voice cracked slightly at the edges, not from fear but from the sheer exhaustion of being asked. Again, to disprove something that had never happened. "I feel threatened," Patricia said, pressing a manicured hand flat against her chest. "I cannot fly seated beside someone who makes me feel unsafe. This is unacceptable." It was a masterstroke of reframing, the aggressor repositioning herself as the victim in real time, in front of 40 witnesses, and it worked exactly the way she needed it to. Renee glanced toward the front of the cabin, already searching for a supervisor. Already choosing, without realizing it, the path that would cost her employer more than anyone in that cabin could yet imagine. "I need to get my supervisor," Renee said. "Please stay seated." As she hurried away, Patricia settled back against her headrest with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had just executed a plan flawlessly. She did not look at Zara. She did not need to. The damage had already been done with the precision of someone who had done this before, somewhere, to someone else, and gotten away with it clean. Zara sat perfectly still, feeling the way you feel standing at the edge of a rooftop, and pulled out her phone. She typed to her father, with fingers that finally, for the first time all morning, trembled. "Something's happening on the flight. A woman is trying to get me removed." Her thumb hovered over send for 1 full second before she pressed it, the message vanishing into the space between them just as Renee returned down the aisle with a man in a navy blazer, following close behind. Neither of them yet understood how much the next 11 minutes were about to cost. Gary Holbrook approached row 22 with the confident stride of a man who resolved conflicts through authority rather than understanding. At 49, with a receding hairline and a permanent crease carved between his eyebrows from 11 years of exactly this kind of mourning, his name badge read Customer Service Supervisor in letters slightly too large for the space allotted to them. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked, addressing the cabin at large rather than any one person. A technique built to sound neutral while quietly handing the floor to whoever spoke loudest. Patricia did not waste the opening. "This passenger has been behaving in a way that makes me genuinely uncomfortable," she said, gesturing at Zara without looking at her. "I've told your colleague I don't feel safe." Gary turned to Renee. "What's been confirmed?" "I checked her ID and boarding pass," Renee said, lowering her voice. "Both match. She's in her assigned seat." Gary absorbed this while his eyes swept the restless cabin. Flight 3D391 was now 14 minutes behind schedule, and every additional minute would ripple through 6 connecting flights across 2 hub airports before noon. His performance metrics, on-time departure rate, customer resolution score, flickered behind his eyes like warning lights on a dashboard. He leaned toward Renee and murmured something not quite quiet enough to keep Zara from catching fragments. "Load today." 91%, Renee whispered back. "Room in the back, near row 34. Gary glanced from Patricia to Zara, running a calculation that had nothing to do with fairness and everything to do with which passenger was more likely to escalate. Which one flew this route 4 times a month? Which one represented the path of least resistance? The answer, to him, was obvious, and it formed a quiet, disturbing arithmetic in which Zara's dignity became the rounding error in someone else's efficiency problem. "Miss Coleman," Gary said, turning to her with a tone he clearly believed sounded reasonable. "We have a situation here that's causing discomfort for several passengers." "The only person expressing any discomfort is her," Zara answered, nodding toward Patricia, "and it's built entirely on her own assumptions." Patricia gasped, a hand flying to her collarbone. "How dare you? This is exactly the hostility I reported." Gary raised both palms in a placating gesture. "Let's all stay calm. Our priority is a safe, comfortable flight for everyone." The words sounded reasonable and rang completely hollow in the way he delivered them. "In situations like this, we do have protocols," he continued. "What protocol specifically addresses unfounded accusations from one passenger about another?" Zara asked, her voice holding steady, though something in her throat had begun to tremble. Gary shifted his weight. "When there's conflict between 2 passengers, company policy gives us discretion to reassign seating for the sake of cabin harmony." "Cabin harmony," Zara repeated, and something in the way she said it made 3 nearby passengers look down at their hands. "You mean appeasing someone who's decided I don't belong here?" "I'm not making assumptions," Patricia interjected. "I'm reporting behavior that concerns me." Gary checked his watch. Flight 3391 was now 19 minutes delayed. The captain would be calling for a status update any second, and ground control would already be adjusting the departure queue behind them. "Miss Coleman," Gary said, his decision clearly already made, though he framed it as still open, "we can offer you a seat in row 34, still by the window, or we can rebook you on the next available flight to Boston." The unfairness of the offer settled over the cabin like a change in cabin pressure. Zara was being asked to pay a price for nothing more than occupying a seat someone else had decided did not belong to her. The college student behind them let out an audible gasp. Walter Briggs, the man across the aisle, finally folded his newspaper flat against his lap and said, quietly but clearly, "This doesn't sound right to me, Gary." Gary did not look at him. Carla Jimenez, the woman in the Carolina blue cardigan 2 rows back, had spent the entire exchange with one hand hovering near the call button above her head, pressing it halfway, releasing it, pressing it again. The small, private battle of a woman who wanted to help and did not trust herself to know how. She was 60 days into a new job, still on probation, still learning which battles a person in her position was allowed to fight out loud. What she could do, she decided, was smaller than what she wanted to do, and she did it anyway. She reached into her bag, pulled out an unopened bottle of water, and passed it forward, row by row, until it reached Zara's hand without a word attached to it. Zara looked down at the bottle, then back over her shoulder, and Carla only nodded once, the kind of nod that says, "I see you, and I'm sorry, it isn't more." It was not a rescue. It did not change what Gary Holbrook was about to do. But Zara held on to that bottle for the rest of the flight, unopened, the condensation cooling her palm. And later, she would say, it was the first thing that made the whole cabin feel less like a courtroom and more like a room full of people, some braver than others, all of them human. Hold that thought, because in exactly 6 minutes, everyone in that cabin is going to find out exactly who they were talking to, and it is going to break the entire morning wide open. Zara looked down at her phone. 2 new messages had appeared from her father, sent 40 seconds apart. "Don't move, Ladybug. I'm handling it." Then, a moment later, "Whatever they tell you to do, stay in your seat until I say otherwise." She had never seen her father type that fast. Something in the second message carried a weight that made the hair on her arms stand up, though she had no way yet of understanding why. 23 miles away, in a corner office on the 11th floor of the Coleman Dynamics Group Tower, overlooking uptown Charlotte, Marcus Coleman had been reviewing a supply chain forecast when his phone buzzed against the glass desk. He read his daughter's message once, then again, his jaw setting into a line his executive team had learned, over 11 years, to fear more than any raised voice. He did not raise his voice now either. That was the part that unsettled people most. Marcus Coleman got quieter the angrier he became, his words slowing down and losing every trace of warmth until the room itself seemed to drop 10 degrees. He picked up his desk phone and dialed a number he had memorized the day Coleman Dynamics signed its logistics contract with 3 of the largest cargo carriers operating out of Charlotte Douglas International. A contract worth $41 million a year to the airport authority alone. "Get me ground operations," he said. Then into a second line, without raising his voice at all. "Get the plane ready. Full stop on the taxiway, if it comes to that." His assistant, a woman named Delphine, who had worked for him for 9 years and had never once heard him ask for this, froze for half a second before her fingers found the keyboard. "Sir," she said carefully.
"Are you sure you want to, Delphine?"
Marcus said, and there was nothing sharp in it, only a stillness underneath the words that was somehow worse than shouting. "That is my daughter on that airplane. Get me the plane." Back in the cabin, Gary Holbrook was still waiting for Zara's answer, his patience visibly thinning under the pressure of a 14-minute delay that had now become 22. "Miss Coleman," he said again. "We do need a decision." Zara looked up at him, and something in her had gone very still. The particular stillness her father called cold weather, the calm that settled over her only when she had already stopped being afraid and started paying attention instead. "I'm not moving," she said quietly, "because I haven't done anything, and moving would tell everyone on this plane that she was right to say, 'I don't belong here.' And I refuse to teach that lesson to a single person watching." The college student behind her started recording again, her phone angled to catch both Zara's face and Gary's. Patricia let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You see what I mean," she said, to Gary, to the cabin. To anyone who would still listen. "This is exactly the attitude I was describing." Nobody answered her. For the first time since Renee had first approached row 22, the cabin went completely silent. No rustling of snack wrappers and no murmured conversation. Only the low hum of the idle engines and 40 people holding their breath at once, watching a 17-year-old refuse to disappear. That silence lasted 11 seconds. Later, 3 separate passengers, when asked to describe that moment to a local reporter, would use almost the exact same words, without ever comparing notes. They said it felt like the air itself had stopped moving, like the whole cabin was holding one collective breath and waiting to see whether the world worked the way it was supposed to. Then Gary's radio crackled at his hip, a burst of static followed by a voice that made his face lose color in real time. Ground control to Flight 3D391. Hold your position. We have an unauthorized aircraft on approach to your assigned taxiway. Repeat, hold position. Do not push back. Gary's hand froze on his radio. Renee's eyes went wide. Through the small oval windows on the left side of the cabin, passengers began turning to look, murmuring, phones rising in a wave, because taxiing slowly, deliberately, into the exact center of the departure runway their aircraft was cued to use, was a gleaming white Bombardier Global 8000, its tail number visible even from a distance. A number Marcus Coleman had personally chosen the year he bought the aircraft, because it spelled, in a small private joke only his daughter understood, the atomic weight of hydrogen, followed by the year Zara was born. For a moment, nobody in row 22 said anything at all. Zara pressed her palm flat against the cool window glass, watching a private jet built for 8 passengers block a runway designed for aircraft carrying 200, and felt something in her chest that was not quite relief and not quite fear. Something closer to the specific vertigo of watching a private world and a public humiliation collide in front of 40 strangers at once. Patricia's leather day planner, still sitting untouched on the middle seat between them, suddenly looked like the smallest object in the entire state of North Carolina. The engines of Flight 3391 fell silent, not powered down, simply paused. The pilot in the cockpit having received an order from ground control that no one on board yet understood. For nearly 90 seconds, nothing moved. No one spoke. The only sound in the entire cabin was the faint electrical hum of the plane's auxiliary power and, somewhere near the front, someone's phone still recording, the little red light blinking silently, capturing a stillness that would later be watched more than 9 million times. Then Gary's radio crackled again, and this time the voice on the other end did not belong to ground control. "This is Marcus Coleman," the voice said, low, unhurried, carrying through Gary's radio just loud enough for the first several rows to hear. "I own the airspace lease your ground crew is currently operating under at Gate C14 through a logistics contract with 3 of your carrier partners, and I am not moving my aircraft off that runway until someone on your flight explains to me why my daughter, seat 22A, Zara Coleman, is being asked to leave a seat she paid for, in full, in cash this morning, because another passenger decided she didn't look like she belonged there." Gary's face had gone the color of the tray table in front of him. Patricia Whitfield sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, her carefully arranged fortress of a scarf and a water bottle and a business magazine suddenly looking exactly as small as it was. Zara did not move either, but something behind her eyes had shifted. Not relief exactly, something closer to the specific, quiet exhaustion of being believed after spending an hour being doubted. "I'll give your airline exactly 10 minutes to sort this out properly," Marcus's voice continued through the radio, "and then I'm calling the FAA press desk myself because I already have." Somewhere in the cabin, Walter Briggs let out a low whistle. The college student's phone had not stopped recording. Word moves fast on an aircraft with no engines running and 40 passengers with nothing else to do but watch. Within 90 seconds, 3 separate people had typed the name Coleman into their phones, and the first face that appeared, a wide shot from a Charlotte Business Journal profile, was unmistakably the same jawline, the same steady eyes, as the calm 17-year-old sitting in seat 22A. A soft ripple of recognition moved backward through the cabin, row by row, like a wave finding shallow water. Isn't that?
Priya.
The college student whispered, angling her phone toward Zara's face, and then back to her screen. Coleman Dynamics, someone else murmured. That's the freight company. That's the guy with the... Walter Briggs said it plainly, without lowering his voice at all. That's the man who just parked a jet on our runway. Renee Sawyer had gone pale enough that another flight attendant quietly took the drink cart from her hands. Gary Holbrook stood in the aisle holding a radio that had gone silent again. Staring at a 17-year-old, he had, 4 minutes earlier, been prepared to move to row 34 for the crime of existing near someone uncomfortable. He opened his mouth twice before anything came out. "Miss Coleman," he said finally. "I save it for the airline," Zara said, not unkindly, just tired, the particular tiredness of someone who has spent an entire morning being asked to prove she was allowed to sit still. Patricia Whitfield, to her credit or her detriment, depending entirely on how you judge these things, did not apologize. She straightened her scarf, lifted her chin, and said, "To no one in particular, well, I still don't think it's appropriate to speak to a grown woman that way, regardless of who her father is." Nobody in row 21 or 22 responded. The silence that followed her sentence was its own kind of verdict. 12 minutes later, a Windham Air regional vice president named Colette Andrade boarded the aircraft in person, having been pulled directly from a connecting flight of her own 2 gates away. Her heels clicking down the aisle at a pace that suggested she understood exactly how much this morning was about to cost her airline. She knelt beside Zara's seat, her voice pitched low enough for privacy. "Miss Coleman, on behalf of Windham Air, I want to personally apologize. This should never have happened, and we're prepared to make it right in every way we can." Then, turning to the rest of row 22, she said more formally, "We'll be addressing the conduct of our staff and reviewing today's incident thoroughly." Gary Holbrook's ears had gone bright red. Somewhere behind Colette Andrade, 2 more staff members hovered near the galley, watching a supervisor's career quietly begin to end in real time. In the days after the video spread, something else surfaced that made the story bigger than one flight, one cabin, one seat. 2 former employees at Patricia's property firm came forward, separately and without coordinating, describing a pattern stretching back years. A maintenance worker denied entry to a tenant meeting he had every right to attend. A young leasing agent quietly reassigned away from Patricia's big accounts after a single client commented on her voice, sounding too urban over the phone. Neither story had made headlines on its own. Both had simply been absorbed, the way so many stories like them are, into the ordinary machinery of a workplace where the person with the least power always seems to be the one who moves. Once the runway story broke, those 2 smaller stories stopped being isolated and started being a pattern, and patterns are much harder for institutions to look away from than incidents. Patricia Whitfield's punishment did not arrive as a single dramatic moment. It arrived the way most real consequences do, slowly, then all at once, in 100 small closing doors. The college student's video reached 400,000 views before the plane had even landed in Boston. By the time Zara touched down at Logan International that afternoon, exhausted and still holding her mother's compass in her fist, the video had crossed 2 million, and Patricia Whitfield's face, frozen mid-sentence, hand pressed to her chest, declaring herself unsafe, had become the single image strangers across the country associated with her name. Within a week, the board of the Commercial Property Association, Patricia had served on for 9 years, issued a quiet statement accepting her resignation, effective immediately. 2 of her firm's 4 managed office towers were owned by holding companies that, as it happened, also held logistics contracts with Coleman Dynamics Group. Contracts that were not renewed that quarter, for reasons stated only as strategic realignment. A boutique women's charity gala she had chaired for 6 consecutive years sent her a brief email explaining that the seat reserved for her this year had been given to someone else. Patricia read that particular email 3 times, and if there was a flicker of recognition in it, the shape of her own sentence to Zara reflected back at her in polite corporate language. She never said so out loud, not to the reporter who called twice, not to the podcast host who requested an interview and was declined, not even, as far as anyone could later confirm, to herself. She gave one statement to a local news affiliate 5 weeks after the incident. Standing in the driveway of her home in the Myers Park neighborhood of Charlotte, her silver hair still perfectly set. "I stand by my right to report a passenger who made me uncomfortable," she said, her voice steady, though her hands visible in the footage were not. It was the only public statement she ever made. She did not apologize in it. She never apologized publicly at all. And that refusal, more than the resignation or the lost contracts or the empty gala seat, became the detail people remembered, because it confirmed something about her that the whole cabin had already understood at 30,000 feet. Some people would rather lose everything than admit the floor beneath their certainty had never really been there. But there was one evening, 7 months later, that almost no one ever heard about. A woman working the front desk at a small independent bookstore on Providence Road recognized Patricia Whitfield browsing the aviation history section.
Kindang.
An odd section for her to linger in, the clerk thought, until she noticed which book Patricia was holding, a memoir titled Turbulence, written by a retired flight attendant about 4 decades of watching prejudice unfold at 35,000 feet. Patricia stood there for 11 minutes without moving. The book opened to a chapter, her reading glasses low on her nose, her face unreadable. She did not buy the book. She put it back on the shelf, straightened it so the spine aligned perfectly with its neighbors, the way she straightened everything, and left without a word. The clerk never mentioned it to anyone until much later, and when she did, she said only this: she looked like a woman standing at the edge of understanding something and deciding, one more time, to step back from the ledge instead of over it. Whatever passed through Patricia Whitfield in that aisle, she carried it home unspoken. And perhaps that, too, is its own kind of sentence. Gary Holbrook was placed on unpaid leave within 72 hours and did not return to Wyndham Air. Renee Sawyer, whose only real failure had been trusting a supervisor's judgment over her own clean verification, kept her job, and 18 months later was promoted to lead flight attendant trainer for the airline's new bias response protocol. A program that, in an irony not lost on anyone who followed the story, was built directly from the timeline of what happened to Zara Coleman in row 22. Wyndham Air's chief executive flew to Charlotte personally 3 weeks after the incident, not for a press conference, but for a private meeting with Marcus and Zara Coleman in the Coleman Dynamics boardroom, where the airline agreed to fund a permanent scholarship in Eleanor Coleman's name for young women entering aerospace engineering, and to adopt what the industry now calls, somewhat informally, the Coleman Protocol, a documentation standard requiring any seat reassignment or removal request to be logged, justified in writing, and reviewed within 48 hours by someone outside the original flight crew. 4 other airlines adopted a version of it within 2 years. That evening, after Colette Andrade's apology, after the aircraft was finally cleared, and Flight 3391 landed in Boston, 51 minutes late, Marcus Coleman was waiting at the arrivals curb of Logan International in a plain gray sedan. Not the Bombardier, not a driver, just his own car and his own 2 hands on the wheel. He did not say anything about the runway. He did not ask her to recount the confrontation for him, because he had already watched the video 11 times on the flight up, and there was nothing in it he needed her to relive out loud. He simply opened the passenger door, waited until she was buckled in, and reached over to rest his hand briefly on top of hers, the same hand still holding Carla Jimenez's unopened water bottle. "You okay, Ladybug?" he asked, and Zara looked out at the unfamiliar skyline of a city she was about to spend a summer learning to call her own and said, "Honestly, for the first time all day, I think I am now." Neither of them said another word until they reached the hotel. Some silences, Marcus had taught her once, are the loudest form of "I'm proud of you" a person can offer. 4 months after the runway shut down for 11 minutes, on a Tuesday morning in March, Zara Coleman stood in a lecture hall at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, presenting a propulsion efficiency model to a room of aerospace engineers 3 and 4 times her age. She wore the same gray hoodie, a little more faded now. Around her neck, tucked beneath the collar, hung a small brass compass on a leather cord. Somewhere in the 4th row, unannounced, having flown up that morning on a commercial flight, coach, seat 14C, purchased like everyone else, sat her father, not saying a word, simply watching his daughter explain thrust vectoring to a room that had gone completely quiet to listen. When she finished, and the room broke into applause, Zara found his eyes across the crowd. He didn't clap right away. He just nodded once, the way he had nodded at her the morning of the flight, the way he'd nodded at her 1,000 times before that. Not because she needed his permission to belong in that room, but because some moments deserve to be witnessed in silence before anyone claps at all. Afterward, walking out across the campus quad in the late June evening, Zara reached up out of habit and touched the small brass compass beneath her collar, the glass worn smoother now from 4 months of exactly this gesture. Her father noticed the way he always noticed and said nothing about it, only slowed his pace to match hers. She never did find out whether Patricia Whitfield ever said her name again out loud to anyone. She decided, somewhere over Massachusetts that summer, that she didn't need to know. Some doors, once they close on their own, are better left closed. If this story reached something in you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone inside it, hit that like button so it finds the person who needs it next. Share it with anyone who's ever been made to feel small in a room they had every right to sit in. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been in that cabin? On which side of it were you standing? I read every single answer.